Welcome back to Roundtail Restoration, folks. My name's Chris Fisher. It's my 1964 Triumph TR4 that I'm restoring. This floor looks in. It's even got some bolts in it. Let's see how I got there. Thanks for watching. All right, let's do this. All right, well, pretty happy with that so far. I do have some bowing right here, so I'm gonna have to push that in a little bit. So I'll flush that up. But all in all, it's tacked in. I did turn the heat up on the welder a little bit. It just wasn't getting good penetration the first time I tried it. I was able to kind of wiggle it a little bit and it popped right off. So hopefully this is a little better this time. The welds are a little flatter, so I'm hoping that's the trick. But we'll go ahead, we'll get this flushed in. I'm gonna have some pretty good gaps. Like I said, these ribs don't match up perfect, which is okay, but I'll push this one in here. Anyway, get all that welded up and we'll move on to something else. All right, that's pretty much in there. I was able to use a hammer and dolly and kind of form these corners a little bit and make them match up a little bit better. Frankly, I was pretty surprised that I could do that. There's a little hole here that I'll have to fill, probably put a piece of copper behind that just because it's big. But otherwise, it's in there nice and solid. So now I've got at least the base, I think, to start fitting the floor. So now that I've got that piece welded in, this strip along the back there, I didn't really weld that in all that great. There's only 3 or 4 tacks on there before I start manhandling the floor in here and moving that around. I don't want to bend it or possibly pop some of those welds. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that in a little bit more sturdily and then start playing with the floor, getting the fit. These holes back here have to be drilled. I'll show you what I mean when I get to that point. These here are the brackets that I had mentioned. They support the floor and essentially provide a landing point from the floor to the frame and the body. So it's structural, 14 gauge, so extra thick. The body's 18 gauge, so I'll give you an idea. And when I was getting these off the old floor, I unfortunately cut a little bit, wasn't incredibly careful, and cut into some of them in a couple spots here, but nothing that was that I can't patch back up with the welder. So I've got this all kind of degreased. I used the ultrasonic cleaner, if you remember from the last video. So all these little silver spots in here are all where it was spot welded like crazy to the floor. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and get these cleaned up. Get paint. I want to get epoxy primer on this, obviously, because it's going to go to the bottom of the floor. I'll show you how that mates up here in a second. Get these all prepped and ready to be welded into the floor and repair those welds, or repair where I cut it. Now, as far as it mating up to the floor itself, so this is the bottom of the floor. This will be on the road side. And then you can see there's 3 holes here, 4 holes down here. So the bracket essentially just welds up to the floor. And obviously the bolt holes are for where it attaches to the frame. Not complicated, not anything really to it. Trick is, however, if you see back here, there's 3 holes here. Obviously that doesn't work. And there's a landing spot right here. So this is where the floor bolts in for the early TR4s without the independent rear suspension or with the solid axle. When they went to the independent rear suspension, that came up and attached in a different spot because they had to clear the trailing arm. So I think these are the same floors for the TR4, TR4A, TR6. They drill them for the TR6 and the TR4A. There's more of those cars out there, especially the 6s, obviously. So that's where they're going to spend their money. But they do have the depression here to allow you to go ahead and use it for a TR4. So first I'll have to fill these holes in. Then I got to find where these holes fit as in comparison to the frame, so I can get those holes drilled and then get this thing welded in. So there'll be a lot of fitment and everything like that to get that figured out, and I've got an idea on how I'm going to do that. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get these brackets cleaned up, get some paint mixed probably, depending on what I'm looking at, and then get these at least prepped and ready and just sitting on the shelf, so when I'm ready to get to that point, I can go ahead and do it. Little side note here, I got myself a new toy, Harbor Freight, obviously, as I'm apt to do most times. A metal shear. This is supposed to cut up to 16 gauge, I believe. Most of the stuff I'm dealing with is 18 gauge. The you can't really do fine work with this. There's another like a nibbler or something like that where you can do some curves, but it's a straight cutter and it's a two-bladed thing. So you got the blade in the middle that moves. I'll turn it on real quick. If you could see that blade in the middle moves and it just shears in between the two outer blades. So again, it's for straight cuts, but it doesn't deform the metal at all. That's one advantage of it. Whereas on the other ones where you kind of see the curves and everything, the right-hand side of that will bend and bow and everything. This will keep it pretty straight. So I'm not going to be able to form metal with this so much as just be able to cut it straight off in preparation for my patchwork. But I'm sick of making a mess in here with the grinding wheel and sparks and all that kind of stuff and the dust and the metallic dust and all that. It was worth with a coupon, of course, it was worth it for me to go out and purchase this. I think with the coupon it cost me about 50 bucks, so not too bad. So we'll see how it works real quick. I just got one of the pieces that I used the other day, so we'll see what happens here. Now it should have like a little curly strip that comes out. All right, so that works pretty well. The trick there is I was holding it up too far. You got to bend it down, kind of run it flat, so I wasn't very straight. So you can see there is a little bit of curve in the edge there. This is the piece that comes off. So that curves it pretty good, but again, this is not a very long piece. But you can see this streamer here that'll come off, and that's obviously waste metal. So you're wasting 1/4 of an inch or so, but heck of a lot quicker and a heck of a lot quieter and a lot less mess than cutting it with a grinding disc or cutting wheel. So hopefully it'll serve me well, and I'll be able to use it. And then one of those nibblers is next. In keeping with the theme, another tool I got is a surface conditioning tool from Harbor Freight, and thing's pretty beefy. Eastwood makes a similar one to these. It's a couple $100. This one I think was $149.99. But again, as you know, shouldn't go to Harbor Freight without a coupon. The Bauer coupons come around every once in a while. I get 15 or 20% off, whatever it is. So I picked this up using that coupon. The point of this is you guys know that I've used discs in the past, at least on the Spitfire, that kind of were similar to this makeup. And they work, they make a mess. I'm just kind of hoping that this will give me a little bit better results, maybe a little bit easier to handle and use. Comes with 3 of these drums, anywhere from real rough up through a finer conditioning. My guess is the real coarse one, it says it's like 40 grit effective, will probably be what I want to use before I put down epoxy primer, so it gives it a good tooth. But as you can see, I mean, the thing's pretty hefty. So go ahead, put it together, get one of these, get the rough disc on there, and I'm going to grab a fender and just take a strip off the fender just to try it and see how I think it's going to shape up. Got the driver's side front fender off. You can see it took some accident damage up here, a whole bunch of Bondo. So I'm going to try to do it with that. Got the heavy duty wheel on there, 40 grit equivalent is what it says. It is a variable speed. I think it's a soft start too. Yep, soft start. The bolt here is reverse threaded, so ask me how long it took me to figure that out, just because of the rotation. So we'll go to town here and see what happens. I've got face shield, gloves obviously, safety glasses, and headphones so I don't make myself deaf or put me something in my eye. Alright, well, this screw started coming loose, so that's probably not good. At least I caught it. So I'll tighten that back up. That, folks, is a lot of Bondo. Holy cow. But that'll give you an idea how it works. I'm actually pretty happy with it, and it's easier to control, and I think it's a little quieter and just feels like it's a little more solid than using the 4.5-inch grinder. Definitely get a lot, with the length of it, you get a lot more oomph behind you. But I'm just going to go ahead and finish taking this down just to get the full extent here. Obviously, I've got a good amount of body work here, and I don't know, about an inch thick full of filler. Awesome. Essentially, this floor has been in and out several times just to do some dry fits and figure out what I needed to replace and what I didn't. I have cut some of the metal off of it, rearranged stuff, probably went a little too far in some spots, but that's okay. So now I'm going to try to get it in there, get another dry fit, take a look, make sure my patch panels are not going to fight me, and then move on with sizing it up, and hopefully I'm going to get lucky. Alright, so it's set in there. Let me show you some highlights here. So none of my bolt holes line up yet. Obviously this needs to come back quite a ways, and you can see back here where the gap is in here. This should go right about even with this heel board here. There was a flange on here that went vertical. I cut that off because I couldn't. It goes behind this piece, and there was no way I was going to get this floor fit in with that there, or at least with it on the frame, because of all the interference, so I cut that off. Right now, this is hanging up, this little T part right here. I know that's kind of hard to see. That there's a little notch in here. If you watched my last video, I think I showed you that, or the video before, and that's not sliding back, but that's holding it up right now. But otherwise, it's I'll clear that, get underneath the car real quick, make sure I'm not missing anything obvious. And then where the tubes come out, there's right here is the tube that comes out for the frame support, and you gotta, this lip on the floor here is pretty heavy, or pretty tight, so you just gotta kind of pull it out a little bit so it clears that tube, because the tube extends beyond the bracket slightly, so you just kind of pull that out and then smash it down, and it works. So I'm gonna go ahead, get under the car, see if there's anything obvious over there that's holding me up and why it's not coming back. And I'll see if I can figure that out. Another hot mess is all that corner in there. I'm not really quite sure how that should go. That stuff was all destroyed. I'm not going to worry about that until the body's off, and that'll be one of the cleanups that I run when I get the floor in permanently. I think what was happening here is you can see the nice pretty flange right here. It just curls, goes horizontal, and back here it was a bit wavy, and there was a spot weld on there. You could see that fresh grounding spot towards the back. Ground that down and just flatten that flange out. Use the hammer and dollar there to try not to tear the metal. So pretty easy, pretty gently doing that. So hopefully with that flatten it out, now it'll just give me some play and allow me to push it in. I also took down the high spots on these stitch welds back here because they were kind of interfering a little bit. So we'll try to get this thing back in and see if I can get it seated properly. All right, so it's seated. It's not adjusted, but it's seated. So under here, it clears that all the way. So obviously, without getting underneath and looking at it, that was a little bit of a trick there. And all my intention is when on the flip side, when I go to weld that seam back in, I'll just essentially beat it back up. This looks like it's going to clear just fine. Again, there was that flange that was there. That's obviously not there now. This is also a spot here coming down in the B post that will tend to get in the way. You just kind of push it down, and then the pole is right under here, right in this notch. We talked about that, where you got to put holes in. And then all the way up here, obviously I'm proud, so I'm going to go ahead and take a mallet, pound that guy back, and see how well I can get it to sit. All right, the floor is set in. This hole lines up really good. There's a sister hole over there with that big metal plate. So that lines up really well. These I'm a little concerned with because you can see it's right towards the edge there. However, looking on the other side, it isn't much a whole lot different. Let's see if I can give you a better angle of that. Not a whole lot different there, so hopefully it's, that's close. That one, however, that's probably not going to work. I don't know how much room I have to push it out. And looking at these, those aren't terrible, but they can definitely come, it can come to the left towards the outside of the car a little bit. And that, you know, if I do get it to move to the outside of the car a little bit, that'll line up better. Looking over here, I'm butting up against the wing in there. All this placement back here is about right. And then you can see there's quite a big gap in between the wing and my patch panel. Now, obviously the patch is not perfect, I knew that. But if I do close in and push in on the B-post a little bit, you kind of see that flexes it and it kind of closes that up a little bit. However, I don't want to do that to make this gap work and then go to put the door on and the door doesn't fit. So that'll be something that'll be a big puzzle piece before I weld this in to do a final fit. As far as getting the holes in here, all I'm going to do is if you can see sunlight through the holes down there. I'm just going to come up through the bottom. Once I'm happy with where the floor is, I'm going to get it bolted in and then come up through the bottom here, just use a punch and punch out the, put little marks in the bottom of the hole and then drill new holes. 5/8 inch holes there, have to fill those obviously. So again, a big advantage here, and I'm finding advantages and not too many disadvantages outside. It's a little unwieldy, is I can bolt the floor down. Unlike the Spitfire, where I did it with the floors and replaced the floors with just the body, I couldn't really get solid placement. I kind of had to cross my fingers and hope I got it right. Here I've got bolt holes that I can bolt and get the floor solidly bolted down and then weld it and get it placed properly, and I don't have to worry about it as much. So I'm going to keep finagling with it a little bit, play with this over here, see if I can get the I think it's twisted a little bit. It needs to kind of rotate to the left a little bit and just kind of keep playing. The solution back here obviously worked to flatten that flange out. I'll get underneath and look at it from underneath and make sure there's nothing crazy going on. But that's yeah, so I'm pretty happy with how it's shaping up so far. Gonna be a little tough to show you this without getting underneath the car, and when I get underneath the car, it's so close that you can't see it. Give you some better light there. So this is the front corner right at the transmission tunnel. Unfortunately, I can't refer to the passenger side because the floors are constructed different up here. So you can see that little notch sticking out, looks like a triangle. That's like a little tab, and I think what happens is that will bend vertically. I can kind of see a remnant of that on there where I failed to get that off of there, so I'll have to worry about that. But then the other vertical place that's running front to back of the car at the bottom there, that is part of the new floor. So I think what's happening is that's running into the transmission tunnel and it's preventing me from pushing the whole floor or tilting the whole floor, rotating it to the outside. So what I'm going to do is pull the floor back out. I'm going to bang that flat, I think. And you can kind of see there, hopefully. I know this is not the best visuals here, but I'm going to try to bang that flat, I think, and that'll give me wiggle room and allow me to move where I want it to move to get the thing lined up. And then when I'm all done and I'm ready to, you know, make my final decision, I'll just slam the, you know, pound it with a hammer back and make the flange again. So pull the floor out real quick. It's got it down pretty well. I can get it in and out pretty quickly, but I can't chase those holes right there with a thread chaser, which tells me that it needs to go over to out. And though I got the floor bolts in over there, that the floor just needs to come just a touch out. So pull the floor back out, see what happens. So I put a notch right in here and then just bent that piece down. Like I mentioned, that the passenger side and the driver's side are different up in that area. And to me, from a water exclusion standpoint, and like it is on the passenger side, you would want the transmission tunnel to come on the outside of the floor, so that if rainwater got in there or something like that, it wouldn't sit on this seam, it would run over it. So that's my intention. But if I tilt this up to get it on the inside, then I'm not going to be able to move the floor forward and adjust it and everything like that. So we're going to go ahead, put it in again one last time, see if I can get any better fit out of it, and pretty much be done with the day probably after that. Yeah, that was the trick. It's in. Bolted up. Got 2 bolts there to that mount. That bolt up there that you can barely see, that's just kind of sitting there, but it's lined up. This guy over here, and then this bolt here, and obviously I can't do those bolts. So this gap is not any better. If anything, it's a little bit worse. But again, I'm not horribly worried about that. I'm sure I can come up with something. So this corner up here is a mess. I have to clean that up and figure out what I'm going to do with that from a more permanent solution and how I'm going to flange that in or whatever. Anybody have any pictures of that or anything like that, and a close-up in that area that wasn't all rusty and nasty and everything, would be helpful. Unfortunately, it is behind the gas pedal thing there, so it's a hidden thing. Unless you've taken it apart, you can kind of see those spot welds there and there, so it's probably going to be hard to get to. So now what's up next essentially is mark these holes, make sure that's all drilled up, get those guys drilled or filled in with weld and little metal discs, and then I've got to go through and punch holes for my plug welds, and that should really do it. That floor will be ready, I think, to weld in at that time. I got to get epoxy primer on all that kind of stuff. Obviously I'm not going to again weld the whole thing. I also want to get the door mounted up. I want to do that before, and I would really like to build the whole sill, so I got to take some metal off if I want to do that. And I've got to remove the inner sill, which right now is kind of the weakly providing some sort of support. So I'm not sure, not too sure how successful I would be at building a sill, but I would like to do that just to see what it's going to look like and how it fits up before I have to weld in the floor. But anyway, so that's not a bad day. All right, everybody, that's all I got. Thanks so much for watching. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. It's been a while since I thanked everybody there for their support. I'm approaching 4,000 subscribers, so that's great. So thanks again for those of you who have subscribed, and for those of you that haven't, if you be so kind to hit that subscribe button or at least give me a like. As always, comments are appreciated. I try to answer every one of them. But a couple more steps closer to getting this floor in. Hopefully we'll get that welded in here in the next couple visits, and then we'll move on to the other side. Thanks again for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.